Hi, I'm Michelle Babb. Welcome to my kitchen. Today, I'm going to teach you how to make your very own homemade sauerkraut. And this whole movement toward fermented foods has been a pretty big one in the last couple of years because we're learning a lot about the microbiome in our gut, which is that microbial environment where a lot of our immune system function happens. And also, it's largely responsible for a lot of what goes on in our brain because we have this really important gut-brain connection. So we want to do a lot to nourish our microbiome and keep it nice and healthy. So you're starting to see a lot more fermented foods in the grocery store. Unfortunately, a little tiny jar of sauerkraut can set you back about $10. So the two ingredients that you will find in traditional sauerkraut that we use to make our own, 1 head of cabbage and a tablespoon of sea salt. So it's very basic, very inexpensive ingredients, and then you need about 2 weeks worth of time to allow it to ferment and do its thing. So today I want to show you just how quick and easy it is to make your own. And you're starting with a 3-pound head of cabbage. So I like to use the green cabbage. You could use purple cabbage. You can also throw in different vegetables as you become more proficient at this. But this is the very basic, easy first step in making your own kraut. So when you start to process the head of cabbage, I like to pull off the first layer, and I'll show you why once we get more of the a little bit deeper into kraut making. But you just pull off a nice big piece of that and set that aside. And then you're just gonna cut into the cabbage, and I've already done some of this work ahead of time just to expedite things. So I've done a whole bowl, which was a 3-pound head of cabbage, where I've just hand shredded it with a knife. So that's one way to do it. You can also use a mandolin if you want more precision in your slicing. You can put it in a food processor with the shredding attachment, and that's gonna get a much finer kraut. So if you like a softer sauerkraut, you wanna do a finer dice. And so using a food processor to shred it might be a good idea for you. I tend to like my kraut to be more on the crunchy side, so that's why I just hand slice it, and I have slightly bigger pieces when I do that. So I've just put it all in a bowl, and then all I'm doing is taking this 1 tablespoon of sea salt, which might seem like a lot, but remember we're working with 3 pounds of cabbage, and I'm just gonna dump this in, and then I'm just gonna be massaging the cabbage. So what I'm doing is massaging the salt into the membranes of the cabbage, and it's gonna help release some of the juices, and that's gonna be important when we go to move it into the jar. So while I'm doing this, I just want to talk a little bit more about the microbiome. This has been an area of research that's really been fascinating to me because this is where we start putting together this idea of what goes on in that environment in our gut and how that can influence so many of the functions in our body. So we have trillions of microbes in our gut and about 10,000 different species. And all of those species have their own sets of DNA. So as it turns out, the DNA in our microbiome far, far outnumbers the DNA in our bodies. So if we're kind of neglecting our microbiome, we're neglecting over 90% of the DNA that's in our body. So we want to be sending good messages to the gut. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen over time that can really create some problems with our microbiome. So I'll use myself as an example. It starts right from birth. So if you were born through C-section, you didn't get as much of the exposure when you were born to the good bacteria that came from your mama. And so already you're at a little bit of a disadvantage. Second thing is if you were not breastfed. So in my case, I was formula fed. So again, a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to your microbiome. And then the next thing is just how often you had to take antibiotics. And when I was a child, I had chronic ear infections that were related to a dairy allergy, but nobody knew at the time that dairy allergies could cause such a thing. So I ended up being on antibiotics a lot of my younger years in my childhood. I took a lot of antibiotics. And then if you've ever had to take other kinds of prescription medications, those can also be hard on the gut and can influence your microbiome. And then, sadly, the standard American diet, which is a lot of sugar and processed foods and ingredients that sometimes we don't even recognize that probably have a negative impact on the microbiome. Eating too much too many foods that are pro-inflammatory, like meat, sugar, processed foods. Those things are not good for the microbiome either, and not eating enough fiber and plant-based foods. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh wow, I've really messed up my microbiome, do not fret, because there's still time, just like there was for me, to make improvements that are really going to have a significant impact on creating a better bacterial balance in your gut. And one of those things is to eat some fermented foods. These are probiotic foods. So cultured dairy, like yogurt and kefir, are other ways to get probiotics into your diet. But if you're dairy sensitive like I am, then it's nice to get some of these fermented foods into your diet as an option to introduce some of those good strains of the beneficial bacteria into your gut. So you can see that I am just massaging the heck out of this cabbage, and it's starting to get to the point where it's looking a little wilted, and a lot of the juices are coming out of the cabbage, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So if I were to taste this right now, it would taste fairly salty because I've got that tablespoon of salt in there, and that's really helping to extract the juice from the cabbage. And now this is ready to transfer into the jar. So that's all I've done. Now you can use, I'll wash that off my hand. You can get fancy and you can use a crock that's like a ceramic crock. In fact, I have one that I could show and tell. So you could use a ceramic crock like this, and those are nice, but what I found was I actually prefer to make my kraut in just this quart jar, something that I bought at the local hardware store. Really easy to find. I also like that once I'm done with the kraut, once it's ready, once it's fermented for about a couple weeks, then I could just pop the lid on it, latch it, and put it in the refrigerator, and it contains the smell because kraut is a little bit pungent, and it also preserves it, and you can keep kraut in the refrigerator for months and months and months. So here's what I do. So we've got the jar, and we've got our very well massaged cabbage, and then you're just putting it in the jar and pushing it down with your fist. So you're kind of punching it down into the jar, because what you want to have happen is the juice from the cabbage should come up and rise above the vegetables, because that's what kind of seals off the cabbage from getting too much exposure to air and then becoming moldy. So we're not looking for mold, we're looking for fermentation. So we just want the bacteria to start breaking this down and doing its work, doing its thing. And so most of the head of a 3-pound cabbage should actually fit into this size jar, this quart jar that I have. So pushing it down, and so then what you'll see is I've got a little bit more juice in the bottom here, and what I often do too is then just pour over some of the juice that's left in the bottom of the bowl, and just some nice juices that are accumulating there. Push it down, just tamp it down with your fist. And now, if I were to sit here for even just a couple more minutes, you'd start to see more and more moisture coming out of this. So it's kind of a cool thing to watch as it unfolds. And then the next thing you're gonna do is take that little piece that I told you to reserve, and that goes right on top. And this is just sort of the blanket that covers it, covers the kraut. And we wanna kind of keep this, the main thing is that you wanna keep the moisture level above the kraut. So that's what's going to happen if you put this little blanket over the top. And then it's a nice idea to put some kind of a weight on top of it. So a really easy way to weight this down is to just a little jar that's filled with water. You could also use jars of baby food, actually work really well, something that's going to fit in this wide mouth jar, and that's going to just work to push that down. So I feel like I've got a little bit of a glare there, but basically what you're seeing here is just this jar in a jar that's holding down the fort here. And then I'm going to take a dish towel and put that over the top. And then this is just going to go in the corner of my counter, and this will sit for 2 weeks. And you can taste it along the way. So technically after about 4 days, you're gonna have fermentation happening at a level where it's technically gonna become kraut. But in order to get the maximum number of those good microbes, you want to let it go for about 2 weeks. You can go beyond that as well. In terms of the crunch factor, the more you let it break down, so if you go beyond 2 weeks, it's going to break down more and more and more. So again, you're going to end up with a kraut that's a little bit less crunchy. So if that's okay for you, then that's perfectly fine. But try it out at 2 weeks and see what you think. And then once you're done, once this is ready, like I said, you just put the lid on top, you take off that blanket leaf, put the lid on top and put it in the refrigerator. And this is a great thing to use. I like to just toss it with mixed greens, and it's kind of like the vinaigrette on the salad. I put some olive oil on and let this be the vinegar flavor, even though there's no vinegar in here. It's actually the fermentation flavor. And then I'll just put whatever other vegetables I'd want to put in a salad, and it's a great way to enjoy your kraut. So lots of different ways that you can incorporate this in your diet, but hopefully this will inspire you to just make your own kraut, really inexpensive, really easy, and feed your microbiome in a way that's going to be very productive.